good turnout here today. We're so glad to have you all. I'm Dr. Brenda Fitzgerald, and I'm the chairman of the board of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. Welcome to everyone. And we especially want to welcome a partner of ours today, and those are the folks from the Reason Foundation. And please stand up, Dr. Robert Poole, who is the founder of the Reason Foundation. Dr. Adrian, we'll be hearing more from him later. Dr. Adrian Moore, who is the vice president of the Reason Foundation. And Amy Pelletier, who is on the committee for the transportation for the Reason Foundation. We are so glad that you're here today. The reason we're here, of course, is to discuss transportation. And I would like to introduce Benita Dodd, who is our vice president in charge of environmental issues, to introduce the panel.
Thank you all for coming. What a sellout crowd. We apologize that we had to seat some people in the room next door. We even had to turn people away today. That just shows how much of a fascination we Atlantans have with this frustrating problem we call congestion. We have a really good and interesting panel today and a great study. You can find it on the website www.gppf.org. It's a hefty study, 78 pages long. We also have it on the Reason Foundation website, which is www.reason.org. One of the things that we realized in Georgia, as the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and as transportation policymakers, is that we have three interwoven challenges facing Metro Atlanta when it comes to transportation policy: congestion, capacity, and cash. The DOT reports that 50% of the vehicle miles traveled in Georgia and 75% of the congestion in Georgia occur in Metro Atlanta. And 50% of that is non-recurring. Incidents, weather. Raise your hand if you didn't get caught in the weather-related traffic today. Debris or a disabled vehicle. 40% of that, of the congestion, the DOT says, is normal, recurring congestion caused by traffic volume. Well, the DOT, and my apologies to DOT, actually calls that normal. And that's a really sad statement that we look at congestion, 48% of the congestion in Atlanta, in Metro Atlanta, as being normal. One of the things that we realize is that congestion is costing this region economically, and it's become a huge quality of life issue. We should be looking at considering the value of people's trips. And this is what Bob, Poole, and the Reason Foundation have done with this study. Robert Poole is Director of Transportation Studies at Reason Foundation, which is a free market think tank he founded. The New York Times calls Robert the chief theorist for private solutions to gridlock. His ideas are now embraced by officials from Sacramento to Washington. Robert is an MIT-trained engineer. He's advised the last 4 presidential administrations on transportation and policy issues. And in the field of surface transportation, he's also counseled the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, the White House Office of Policy Development, National Economic Council, Government Accountability Office, and state DOTs in numerous states.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me explain how we came to do this study as a brief intro. Reason Foundation has a major national project called the Galvin Mobility Project. Bob Galvin, the retired chairman of Motorola, is investing a lot of his personal money in a couple of major public policy initiatives, one of which is this. He came to Reason Foundation and said, would you guys like to engage in a major national effort over a period of years to focus attention on reducing this horrible problem of congestion that threatens to strangle America's cities and sort of suck the economic vitality out of them? We said, oh yes, we sure would, and we worked out a whole game plan. And so there's about 24 studies. There's a book that came out in September called The Road More Traveled. That's kind of a popularized version of why we need to get serious about reducing congestion. Part of the project is a series of case studies of specific real urban areas to look at applying a fresh approach to reducing congestion to them. Atlanta was the first city we picked. We screened 100 metro areas looking for places with already serious congestion problems, a high rate of growth that would indicate worse problems in the future if the status quo continues, but also an openness to change. And Georgia is one of those. Georgia and Atlanta ranked high because you already have a public-private initiatives law that's starting to produce some innovative proposals. There's already been a lot of research on hot lanes and tot lanes. CERTA in particular has been a national leader in looking at these new ideas. So we thought, all right, here's a place, it's big problems, but also a potential to take a fresh look and a departure in policy and try to do things in a different way. So that's how we came to do. We started last December, just at the same time that the governor's Congestion Mitigation Task Force had announced their recommendations for making congestion reduction the major focus of transportation policy here. So it's a big problem. The Travel Time Index is a measure that's used nationwide, created by the Texas Transportation Institute, measures the relationship between how long it takes to get somewhere at rush hour versus how long it takes when the freeways are not congested. And today in Atlanta it's 1.46. It means it takes 46% longer at rush hour than other times. And according to the ARC's own projections, if the status quo continues as reflected in the current Mobility 2030 long-range plan, it'll be 1.67 by the year 2030. That's a pretty dismal future. That means things are bad now and they're going to get a lot worse despite spending tens of billions of dollars over the next 25 years. TTI, the Texas Transportation Institute's estimate of just the value of wasted fuel and time in today's congestion is $1.75 billion a year. The true economic cost, according to a lot of other research, is much higher, but that's sort of the basic underlying number. So we think, and I think it was very clear from the governor's task force, that the current approach, as reflected by the existing, not yet modified long-range plan, really needs rethinking. Of the $26 billion that's proposed on investing in transportation infrastructure during that 25-year period, $10 billion is for transit, $5 billion for HOV lanes, and only $8 billion for highways, which represent the vast majority of all the trips that get made, not only by individuals, but by the vital function of goods movement for trucks, which virtually everything comes and goes on trucks. And yet, I mean, the reason for all that emphasis is to try to shift people out of driving alone. But look at the numbers that we got from ARC's own analysis are that if their plan, as it's written, is implemented, and I should say the former plan probably because it is under revision now, but if that original plan stayed in effect and were fully implemented, you only have just tiny fractions of change in the commuting mode share by 2030 after all that expenditure on trying to change things. You'd still have drive alone be the vast predominant mode. Carpooling would actually slightly shrink as a fraction, and transit would only be about 1.5 percentage points more, which is a drop in the bucket. And that's why the congestion, I mean, these things will not reduce congestion. I mean, these numbers, not our numbers, their numbers, show that they will not, and the plan reflects that. So we think that the model focused especially on rail transit and carpooling as a means to reduce congestion simply won't work because it can't capture enough of the trips to make a difference. Atlanta's density is far too low, particularly for rail transit. You need about 8,000 people per square mile, most people have concluded, to make rail transit viable. Only this core area between downtown and Buckhead has anything like that kind of density. The rest of Atlanta does not, I guarantee you, over this 25-year period, will not have that level of density. The jobs are increasingly in the suburbs, not in the so-called central business district, and most commuting is suburb to suburb. This is not in the report, but it's very illustrative. Transit, this is a comparison at the same scale of Barcelona, Spain, where rail transit works well, and Metro Atlanta, the urbanized areas of both. Approximately the same population, these are 1990 population figures, but approximately the same population. And you just imagine the problem of trying to connect origin to destination over this vast area. I mean, we don't have the GDP to spend on doing that here in Metro Atlanta. Nobody's going to go more than a half a mile to get to any kind of a transit stop, unless they drive to it, of course, and driving is supposed to be bad. Here's the latest figure showing the how suburb-to-suburb commuting has become the predominant mode, low density to low density. Again, I mean, we need to do transportation planning that deals with the reality that's out there and that's going to likely remain there. The other factor we looked at, when we looked at the patterns, I mean, this is only a few examples. Atlanta has one of the most radially oriented freeway systems of any large metro area in the country. It's designed on the old model that every place is New York, where all the important stuff happens in the downtown core, and so therefore the roadway system funnels everybody into it. Well, about 4% of the metro area's office space is in where we are now, the downtown core. 4%. I mean, this is not a picture. I mean, the system was designed for a reality that, if it once existed, no longer exists that way. And you look at Dallas, and we have some other examples in the report, much more of a network that allows you to get from place to place without having to go through downtown or way around it to do that. So we welcomed, it was a coincidence, but not too surprising given what else we knew about the positives for Atlanta, that the Congestion Mitigation Task Force recommended setting a goal, instead of allowing congestion to increase to be much worse by 2030, aggressively work to get it lower than it is today by 2030 as at least a first step, revamp the long-range plan so that, and you're selecting what projects to do with the limited amount of money that's available, you put the large majority of the weighting on how much does this project contribute to the goal of reducing that congestion. And then developing a cost-benefit methodology that allows you to then rank those projects by, how much bang for the buck, what do you get. So how do you slash? As Benita said, about half of the congestion is incident-related, like we had today, and there are things, there are already a lot under the governor's Fast Forward program, under some other things that are going on, more video cameras, the excellent freeway service patrols. There's also, we point out in the report, some legal changes for incident response that Tyler actually pointed out to me that a few states, not Georgia, have adopted that allow for speedier clearance by giving more priority to getting the incident cleared up, as opposed to letting law enforcement take their sweet time for 2 or 3 hours to document everything in exact final detail. And better management of work zones can play a big, and there's already some good stuff GDOT is doing on that. The other part, the part that really plagues us, the recurrent congestion, the normal congestion that's out there every day, comes from trying to put 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. I mean, you just can't do it. The system is overloaded. So there are some things we can do, and that GDOT is working on. Ramp metering on freeways is a proven technique. Minnesota has, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, where John is from, is the leader in the country in aggressive use of ramp metering, and it really does make a difference. Arterial signal timing is underway, and there's a ways yet to go in Atlanta. Those are the low-hanging fruit, the easy things that are relatively low cost. The big-ticket items that we see in the current long-range plans don't get anywhere near enough attention. Our bottleneck removal, which here, the big parts of that are rebuilding freeway interchanges that are obsolete by design or can no longer handle the level of traffic flow that needs to go through them, and sheer additions of capacity to have the system be more in keeping with the demands that are put on it. Now, freeway building here used to keep more or less pace with the growth in travel, but starting in the mid-1990s, it pretty much came to a halt, and yet the travel continued to grow, and that's exactly the time period when congestion got from moderate to really bad. So with that as a background, we had a couple of researchers from the University of North Carolina worked with ARC's traffic assignment model to run an exercise aimed at the year 2030 of how much additional capacity would you need in the highway system, not to eliminate all congestion. At this stage we weren't that ambitious. We said, but just to get rid of the worst stop-and-go conditions, the level, what they call level of service F congestion. And this map was one of the results. This just looks at the freeway system, but it shows by how wide these colored bars are, how many additional lanes would be needed to eliminate that severe level of service F congestion. So you obviously, you who live here in Atlanta know where the really bad places are. the downtown connector, which needs 3 lanes in each direction to just get rid of the worst stop-and-go congestion, and 285 North. I mean, those are the really big ones, and you know, you can see by the size of the colors and so forth what else is needed. So we said, okay, that's our assignment. How could we possibly do that? I mean, and most people would throw up their hands and say, well, that's just not possible. But we think that there are some ways to do that, and that's what you probably read about in the AJC article this morning. We came up with 4 major projects, mega projects, all of which could be done as priced lanes, and thereby raise revenue, the kind that you see what originally developed the Georgia 400, to pay for some significant portion, at least, of the cost of doing these. A north-south tunnel that would provide the 6 additional lanes to relieve the downtown connector. A complete network of express toll lanes over the whole freeway system, instead of building the currently planned HOV system on the freeways. A new east-west link below I-20, and a separate toll truckway system for long-haul trucks. Here's the map, just shows how this route would go from where the Georgia 400 comes into 85 now and go due south as a tunnel to below I-20, and then connect down to where 675 terminates now. And that route, that original route, was in something called the, I think it was the the Atlanta Urban Tollway System Plan. Wilbur Smith Associates researched that in the early 1970s for the predecessor of CERTA. And of course it was planned in those days as a surface route, and understandably there was a whole lot of neighborhood opposition to that route. It got knocked out, but it made, I completely sympathize and understand the neighborhood objections to not having this freeway or tollway go through there. But from a transportation standpoint, from a network standpoint, it made sense in 1970. And with the vastly greater amount of traffic today, it makes even more sense today. But building it as a tunnel would mean it would be possible to do that without messing up those neighborhoods, and still gain the huge benefits from doing that. And our model for this is an actual tunnel of similar dimensions that's being done as a long-term private concession by Kofi Route in the suburbs of Paris to complete a missing link in the Paris Ring Road that's been missing for 35 years because it was planned to go through Versailles. Now, how many of you have ever been and seen the palace at Versailles? You can understand, if you lived there, you wouldn't want it to go through there either. So this private sector unsolicited proposal, took a few years for the French government to get comfortable with it, is under construction. It's 2/3 done. All toll funded as a long-term, I think it's a 75-year concession. Innovative idea of reduced dimensions, cars and small, light trucks only, no big trucks, so you can cram 6 lanes, 3 northbound on one level, 3 southbound on the other level. It's north-south just like here, into as minimum a diameter as you can get. And this giant tunnel boring machine has been boring that thing about 100 feet below Versailles. And I have not, unfortunately, been there to see it, but a number of my colleagues have, and it knocked your socks off. The express toll network, we built this on paper using the physical configuration that's in the the complete GDOT HOV plan, which for most of the system calls for 2 lanes in each direction to be added to the existing freeway. We made a number of changes. All of ours would be value priced, which is the key to being able to pay for it out of toll revenues. You would not give away vast amounts of the capacity to 2-person carpools, which is leaving a fortune on the table. You do allow super high occupancy vehicles, van pools and buses, to have free access. And you can still get a lot of high occupancy and a lot of people moved with that way. But also by doing this, having every vehicle then to be allowed to be legally on there would have to have a transponder. A van pool transponder would say an authorized van pool goes free, authorized bus goes free. So the enforcement then becomes completely simple. Video cameras and your electronic equipment is all you need. You don't have any patrol officers doing that. I mean, assuming the law permits that, which it should, and it may already in Georgia. So we think this is a truly, of all the things we're proposing, this is the slam dunk, home run, easiest. We project it to be self-financing, and this is what the whole network would look like. We proposed doing it in 4 phases, starting with the places with the most congestion, the northern part of 285, where the most revenue potential also is. And compared with a conventional hot lanes approach that would allow much of the traffic to go for free, this would be self-funding. It gets you because you have the revenue source available. You can pay. You can get it built much sooner. The existing fiscally constrained long-range plan only builds about 60% of it by 2030 because there's not enough money to do the rest. And all these lanes would be available as bus lanes as well. They'd be the virtual equivalent of exclusive busways because the value pricing allows them to operate uncongested level of service C during the worst of rush hours. And so from any bus operator standpoint, this is as good as having an exclusive bus lane, but without the huge waste of all that expensive pavement that would occur if you reserve part of that to be an exclusive bus lane. And it would give every single driver in the metro area who was willing to sign up for one of Rosa's transponder tags congestion insurance that wherever you needed to go across the whole metro area, you knew there would always be an uncongested route available if you felt that you really needed it and it was worth paying for. And I can tell you, for 10 years of having these projects in Southern California, people absolutely love to have that alternative. They're dying to have it in Washington, D.C., where a project like this is about to get underway, adding 2 hot lanes in each direction to the Washington Beltway. So this would be a real winner, I think. This is the map showing the extending the existing Lakewood Freeway to the east with a tunnel to link with I-20 and to the west with the freeway because we didn't think there was enough congestion potential there to justify the tolling, but that may change in the future. This is we were very impressed with the Tot Lane study that CERTA released last year, but they raised the study raised a dilemma because the route that that looked like it made the most sense was to follow the way trucks now go, having to go around on the perimeter. But then you run into the problem of trying to fit 4 express toll lanes, which are very important and have huge benefits and huge revenue, and 4 tot lanes, all in that really difficult corridor. And so we suggest, instead of doing that, go ahead and put the express toll lanes up there, but do a straight shot for this portion of the truck system as another tunnel with a little tunnel extension here. Do the rest of it, particularly the outer parts, as probably mostly elevated or some combination of surface and elevated lanes, along with the express toll lanes there. I mean, obviously, this is a conceptual idea, needs to be a lot more further detailed study, but we think there's a lot of potential. And here we looked at 39-foot diameter that would provide 2 lanes. There would be twin tubes, 2 lanes in each direction with space for breakdowns for the trucks. Overall, we're talking about, we did a net present value analysis comparing our revenue projections, which are detailed in great detail, and all the assumptions we made in the back of the appendix of the report. About $25 billion total for the 4 projects in today's dollars. We estimate that about $20 billion of that could be financed with toll revenues, and about $5 billion would have to come from conventional highway funds, basically gas tax funds. But you'd save $5 billion from not having to spend the $5 billion that's already in the plan for building the HOV system, because the express toll network displaces that and does something better than that. So the money is available to backstop what can be financed with tolls. Benefits: when we ran the ARC model with these capacity plus the arterial and local road that also need to have added capacity, we got a 27% decrease in the vehicle hours of travel in the year 2030 compared to the baseline, what it would otherwise be. An actual fraction of 1% decrease in vehicle miles traveled startled everybody. You build more and you have less vehicle miles traveled. Well, it turns out a lot of people now, the freeways are so bad that they take the circuitous arterial and surface roads. If you make the freeways work better, they come back. Some of them come back to the freeways, make shorter number of miles traveled to get from the same origin to the same destination. And so it's plausible, it was surprising, but it's plausible that you don't have a net increase in VMT compared to the baseline conditions by making the freeway system much, much more functional, much better. And we estimated that 20-year time, just the time and fuel savings, would be worth nearly $100 billion. That's a 4-to-1 benefit cost ratio. So even if, as some people are saying, our cost numbers may be low, let's suppose they need to be 50% higher, you'd still have probably a 3-to-1 benefit cost ratio, although it would be harder to finance. Well, the next slide says the economic benefits would be even greater than the 100 billion cost savings, and it's based partly on U.S. DOT's chief economist's estimate that the dollar figures of the cost of congestion that are in the Texas Transportation Institute's report, which was the 1.75 billion a year for Atlanta, really understates the true economic cost of congestion to a significant. He estimates the true economic cost is more than 2.5 times as much as what Texas Transportation Institute measures. So if that's true, then the benefits would be much greater than what I've said. Transit benefits, which we may or may not get up on the screen, 1,258 lane miles of the equivalent of exclusive busways would be available for region-wide BRT service, without having that expensive fixed guideway investment having to be squeezed from FTA somehow, which is way more than they would ever give you. But it would become available for transit use on a use that's completely compatible with level of service C, high volume, high capacity, high speed, reliable service in the managed lanes. And the bus transit, as we've tried to suggest, is much more flexible, much more compatible with the actual land use configuration of Metro Atlanta than any conceivable rail transit plans, even if you had the money to do them, which you don't. So our recommendations to finally bring this to a close: you need to seriously revise the long-range plan along something like these lines, and I'm pleased to say that the revision has started consistent with all 4 transportation agencies agreeing with the recommendations of the Governor's Task Force. Do a lot of educational work to educate the public about the importance of value pricing, not only from a funding standpoint to make possible these kinds of investments, but also from making the system work much better and providing real congestion relief and the real transit benefits. So we recommend that these mega projects be done by the long-term concession model that's been well proven in Europe and Australia. I mean, we have a tremendous track record, and it's starting to come. Texas has already got a number of these underway. Several of the proposals that came in last week here in Atlanta were long-term concession proposals. Some people are in the room who submitted some of those. So we recommend this become the mode of choice because you can shift to the private sector investors construction risk and traffic and revenue risk. And that is an immense benefit that shields the taxpayers of Georgia from taking those risks. Closing thought from former Secretary Mineta, which I'll have to read to you. One of his parting words before stepping down in May: congestion is not a scientific mystery, nor is it an uncontrollable force. Congestion results from poor policy choices and a failure to separate solutions that are effective from those that aren't.
Closer to home, I'm going to introduce Rosa Rountree. She's the Executive Director of the State Road and Tollway Authority. CERTA's mission is to maintain and operate safe and efficient toll facilities, and that's a growing initiative in Georgia, and we're proud to be part of it as the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. CERTA's mission is to maintain and operate those safe and efficient toll facilities and to provide innovative transportation finance opportunities to enhance the mobility of Georgians. Before joining CERTA, she served as a senior ITS specialist for PBS&J, a project manager for ACS, which was previously Lockheed Martin, and an operations manager at the Orlando Orange County Expressway Authority. She has more than 20 years' experience in toll operations, in management, in finance, and in customer service. Ms. Rountree is a member of Women in Transportation, International Bridge, and the Tunnel and Turnpike Association. She's a graduate of the University of West Florida, and we welcome her to our panel.
We're doing great things here in Georgia, and that's a lot of what these guys are saying. We're already doing great things here in Georgia, okay? The governor, in his wise wisdom, decided to create a congestion mitigation task force. He brought together 4 agencies that in the past had not worked together before. Collectively, we came up with a resolution that will move transportation and mobility forward. These guys took that and the data that we have here in Georgia today and said, let's look at some visionary, conceptual ideals and put it in place. That's what you're hearing today. Former Secretary Mineta said it when he was going out. He said, what we're about to do may seem very controversial to those who are okay with what was status quo. I beg to offer that the state of Georgia isn't status quo. We are moving forward and driving change. If you haven't had a chance to read that document, it is there, and Tyler can speak to that as well. I'm encouraged because not only is the Reason Foundation bringing this data together, but they're taking data that we have here in the state of Georgia. They didn't create anything. And if we waste our time arguing about the numbers back and forth, then we waste time that's valuable to moving that transportation forward. I drove last week to the gas station and gassed up, and gas was $2.12. This week it's $2.07. A month ago it's right at $2.01. 3 months ago it was $2.20. And it continues to change. So the numbers that you're looking at, it's changing constantly. Construction costs, DOT is saying, it's pretty much tripled. We look at gas prices and don't relate them to the construction on the highway. Well, it does. We seem to have a disconnect when we talk about transportation. In 71, we had a pricing that we said that here's what we're going to pay for gas pricing, and it hasn't changed. Well, I know my movie tickets have changed, and my milk has changed. And when I buy a dozen of eggs, it's changed. And so it has all changed. I don't think we've mismanaged our funding for transportation. I just think that what we put in place 50 years ago that we're celebrating and we're so proud of, the highway infrastructure, I think we've got to change it today. I think what you're hearing today is probably a little not what we're comparable with. And I know you're thinking, she's from that toll authority. She wants to create a new toll road. I have had the opportunity to work in about, there's 34 and continuing growing toll authorities, over 20 of those toll authorities, and they're very successful. But one of the things that makes it more positive is that we don't force you to take the toll road. It's not a force issue. We like to call it user finance facilities. The users pay for that access. We always offer transportation choices. That's a lot of what you heard today. They never said this was going to replace what we currently have. We're not going to replace it. We're going to add to it. We're going to supplement to what we currently have today. We're going to offer transportation choices. And that's a lot of what you're hearing. So I'm encouraged, Bob, and the Reason Foundation thought enough of looking at what the governor was doing in the state of Georgia with our congestion mitigation task force, that they thought enough of what we're doing, having all the studies that we're doing with the State Road Tollway toll study. But let me add to that, because even though it was published under the State Road Tollway Authority, GDOT, Greta, ARC, Georgia Motor Trucking Association all had a very big part in that. And let me also add that that is also a visionary document. We had $700,000 to do a study. It was an HOV study, and most of you have seen that study. When we finished the study, we found some significant increases, very minor increases in reduction in congestion. Somebody stepped outside of the comfort zone and decided to do a truck-only toll lane study. And one of those people that we all admire is Dr. Mike Myers, who sat on that study. And sometimes it takes visionaries to step out of what we commonly are doing to bring something new. With about $75,000, they said, let's embark on something different. And they started the truck-only toll lane study. But even more importantly with that study, they did something even more differently. They said, let's not just do the engineering part of it, which we've become so comfortable in doing because no one knows better than we do, right? We said, let's involve the people who use the road. Let's involve the truckers. And let's truly make them partners in this study, because we only have $75,000. And so they came to the table, and we had ideals, and they had ideals, and we literally listened to their ideals. And if you know that what that study produced, that whole HOV part, that second alternative, that came from the truckers. Right? That came from listening to our partners, said, this would work if we could do this. Sometimes it takes conversations and dialogue and truly listening to make a difference. And that's what the Reason Foundation is presenting today, a dialogue. Something they're saying, this is just the first part, very high level. Our top study was a high level. And when I say our, that means all of my partners. I never present that study without listing my partners because we could not have done that by ourselves. We're talking about a dialogue today that we want to continue for the future. And by having this dialogue, Federal Highway is also interested. And that's one of the reasons Tyler Duvall here is saying, we're glad to hear that you guys are, one, you recognize you have a congestion problem, and when you recognize there's some solutions, and oh, by the way, we're going to help you get to some problem solving. Thank you.
Tyler Duvall is the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy in the Office of the Secretary at the Department of Transportation. He was nominated by President Bush on January 17, 2006, and he was confirmed on May 26 by the Senate. Tyler currently works with the Undersecretary for Policy and the administrators for US DOT's various modal and safety administrations in the development of transportation policies. From 2002 to 2003, Tyler was the Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy. Before joining US DOT, he worked as an associate in the Business and Finance Group of Hogan & Hartson LLP, which is the largest law firm in Washington, D.C. He has his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law and his Bachelor of Arts with a major in economics from Washington and Lee University. He's married to Andrea Duvall. He has 2 daughters, Olivia and Julia, and he was born and raised in the D.C. area. Welcome, Tyler.
This is a major economic problem that is not just a little issue for transportation planners. This is an economic catastrophe that we're heading towards in the United States if we do not take a different approach. I think one of the great problems is that we're misidentifying the problem. We basically are identifying the problem right now as a funding problem. It is not a funding problem. As the quote from Secretary Mineta said, it is a policy problem in the United States. We have tremendously misallocated resources. The question for anybody who's advancing new funding should ask, what are we getting for what we're spending now? The rate of return on investments in the United States for highways has plummeted into the low single digits. And this is not because highway investments are bad investments. It's because we are not making the right highway investments. Political influences, not customers and consumers, are driving investments all over the place. That is a problem. We need to reverse that. There are no price signals in the system. We have no idea where resources should be spent because there are no price signals to tell us where capacity is most constrained. And I think most importantly, there's no transparency. Users of the system have no idea what they're paying for or how they're paying for the system, which makes them very disconnected, I think, from the policy discussion about how resources are expended. We have this debate in America about funding and a debate over here about system performance as if they have nothing to do with each other. That's not true. We announced this congestion initiative with 2 basic goals. One is to really drive system throughput of the existing network, to make the case that you can do a lot now with the existing network to improve throughput. And the second objective is to drive resources to where they need to go. The low rate of return is probably typical of any major mature network asset, but it is far more serious than that. And I think the basic point, and we had this huge earmarking debacle in Washington that got a lot of political attention, that's the same thing that's being carried out at the state and local level. And in fact, I actually have some sympathy for congressional members in the earmarking battle, because their response typically is, well, if I don't earmark, the funds are basically earmarked at the state and local level through political processes. We have got to take back the network. For those of us who care about the economic future, the lives of everyday Americans, we've got to take back the network for rational decision making. 2 things I want to touch on. One is there's 6 different elements of the congestion initiative. There's 2 broad themes that I just outlined, but there's 6 different initiatives. The 2 I want to touch on, which relate to Atlanta, is 1, urban partnership agreements. US DOT basically seeking major metro areas. You all are probably the 10th or 11th that we visited in the last 5 months to really lay out a case for a new model. Effectively, an urban partnership agreement to do a demonstration of 4 things. Those 4 things are as follows. 1, variable pricing. There's no question in our minds that pricing in some fashion and in some scope has got to be part of the long-term solution for congestion. And I can talk more in detail about that in the Q&A if you want. Second piece is telecommuting and flex scheduling. This is an idea that businesses have already started to understand is powerful, but has received almost no policy support with the exception of here in Georgia. We'd like, as part of this demonstration agreement, to really sign up several major employers to participate in the flex scheduling telecommuting arrangement. Third piece is transit. And as Bob said, we've got to make the right transit investments. It's too often that we are politicizing transit investment decisions. The bottom line from our standpoint is whatever moves the most people at the lowest cost is what we should be pushing. And there's no question in our minds that bus services are underinvested in the United States right now. And if you can create free flow conditions on highways, we have a lot of faith and study to prove that people will ride buses in the United States. And we believe we can create free flow conditions. And the 4th piece is technology. We are far too ignorant as users of the system, and this is part of the model problem, about what's going on in the network at all times. Real-time traffic information is about to explode in this country. We've met probably in the last 6 months with 7 different companies that are on the verge of providing real-time traffic information to everybody sitting in this room. As you walk out the door, you can punch in 4 different route destinations. You'll even get a prediction of what it would take you for time. That is out there. It's about to happen. Acura's latest vehicle has this real-time navigation system. That's coming, but public agencies have got to do more. It's not the coolest thing to do a ribbon cutting next to some sensor saying, producing real-time traffic information, but it really matters to people, and it also relates to the first piece, which is pricing. And I think they're very related issues. And I want to spend 2 minutes here on congestion pricing. As I said, there's little question in our mind that the long-term solution can be anything other than more direct pricing of the system. In the United States right now, we spend over 50% of our highway dollars come from basically non-direct sources. That includes, I would include in the category of direct sources, gasoline taxes and tolls. Over 50% come from everything else: general fund, motor vehicle sales taxes, property taxes, general sales taxes. We are increasingly pursuing policies that not only further the problem of they disconnect, but they really don't do anything to manage system use. And I think one of the things we've been saying is that if you can charge users directly, you can drive system performance. And we have the MinPass folks here in Minneapolis who are pursuing, I think, one of the most creative demonstrations of variable pricing in the country. And I really encourage you to look at what they're doing in Minneapolis, in Southern California, what they're about to do in Washington, D.C. This is coming a huge wave in the United States. We can talk about the policy issues. I'll respond right now to the 2 main arguments you hear. What about low-income people? My response to that is several. One, low-income people polled everywhere in the United States that we've seen love it. That's the first point. Second point is low-income people have a lot more time inflexibility than high and middle-income people, actually. A lot of them are on fixed schedules. They need the choice. They need the insurance policy connected with pricing. And I think the other third most important point is come up with policies to benefit low-income people. We have technology widely available right now to deal with, you get transponder technology. Decide what population is you want to subsidize and subsidize that population. But don't let that argument rob the entire network of its productivity. Deal directly with that issue. And I think you will see when we make that argument to people, they kind of understand it. I think that argument is one that we can be addressed. But I also don't agree with a lot of transportation people that it's been solved. You do need to deal with the low-income issue in the public policy debate. Second issue that you hear a lot is double taxation. Well, I think this is basically wrong, the argument about double taxation. You've got, on average, Americans pay about 2 to 4 cents per mile through the gasoline tax for highway use. Congestion in metro areas in Atlanta, urban Atlanta, ranges in 50 cents to $1 a mile. We are wildly underpaying for peak period use of highways in the United States. We have found around the world and here in the United States that very small reductions, which means the prices don't have to be that high, produce huge increases in throughput. In Washington, D.C., the new Secretary Mary Peters always refers to the Washington in August phenomenon. I was talking to somebody earlier about this. You get about 5 to 7% of the population in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Congress and its staff, on recess in August, and we have free flow conditions. This has been this has been replicated around the world. There was a UK study last year nationwide in the UK. 4 to 8% reductions produce 50 to 60% reductions in congestion. The point there is we're really close. We're really close. Prices don't have to be that high. If you give people some discretion and use a dynamic system like they have in Minnesota, you actually can shift trip times 30 to 45 minutes, and you see huge increases in throughput. There's a great misconception that people are inelastic to prices. They are inelastic to gas price increases. They are generally inelastic to toll price increases, but they are not inelastic when you give them choices to shift trip times by 30 to 45 minutes. We've got a little program called the Value Pricing Pilot Program, which these guys in Minnesota have benefited from. Georgia is a participant in that program too. Huge success, great studies. What we have now done related to this urban partnership, and this will be announced, I'm going to pre-announce it here anyway, we're going to basically go out to the world with solicitations and proposals to do kind of network-wide demos, as I just said. We've got the ITS program, Intelligent Transportation System program. We're going to basically put in place about $100 to $125 million for major metropolitan areas to come to us and be a partner. We're looking to up to 5. If we only get 1, we'll do with 1. But we'd like to prove to the world that this is a solvable problem with some substantial policy changes. And then, as they have done in Stockholm, which I think is a really important lesson to learn, they did a voter referendum. They said, what do you think? We solved the congestion problem in downtown Stockholm. We put in place variable pricing, took it off after 9 months, let congestion come back, swamp the system. Then they did a vote. Voters decided to keep it in place. Conservative government won in Stockholm, in Sweden for the first time in forever, I think, has decided that they actually want to reinstall it now. There was a big debate about what you do with the revenues. That, I think, ultimately is a policy question that we do not want to intervene at the federal level. We think state and locals can decide for themselves what to do with the revenues. But the basic point is that if you price the system more efficiently, you will solve and basically create free flow congestion. You'll eliminate the recurring congestion. The 50% non-recurring congestion will not be solved through a pricing system. But I think that number of 50% recurring, 50% non-recurring is probably a little bit wrong. I think we're seeing huge growth in recurring congestion. So we're going to put this RFP out. I'll send it to anybody in this room who's interested in reading it. It'll come out hopefully in the next week. After the Fed register process, which is painful. But the basic point we're saying is we want to see ideas. We want to see major metro areas that are willing to do this. The final thing I want to touch on is the role of the private sector. We have been out there very clear that we think the private sector has got to play a role in improving U.S. infrastructure, not just new capacity, but existing capacity. We have seen very creative proposals in the D.C. area come out of nowhere, unsolicited proposals to improve the system. That's what we want to see. We want to see folks looking at the U.S. highway network saying this is where it can be improved and this is how we would do it. I understand there was some controversy here in Georgia, obviously, but the state law that's in place now, as I've read, has cleared up some of those issues. We want transparency. We want the public to understand what these deals are. But the bottom line is the capital is widely available, and to not tap into it would be, I think, a huge policy mistake. You can address all of the public policy issues that folks opposed to this would raise and still attract all of the capital that you can imagine to improve major metropolitan systems. There are probably 7 states that we look at that all of the private entities that we talk to around the globe are interested in. Virginia, Georgia, Florida, California, Texas, Illinois, and probably the Pacific Northwest. New York, New Jersey will also probably do some big things here in coming months. Bottom line is we have got to recognize the potential of this resource, recognize the policy incentives, not just the financial benefits of these, the incentives to manage the facility efficiently, deploy technologies more quickly, and improve system throughput. These are huge policy benefits that we've got to understand are sitting out there for the taking if we get the conditions right. And I really encourage, the engagement at a low level is not sufficient. This has got to be very high level interest. I commend this foundation and this group for basically coming and listening to this. But don't walk out of here and just say, okay, it's great to hear about congestion. This requires sustained engagement. This is a political problem more than it is a policy problem in America. The policy issues are getting hashed out, and I think are increasingly not the issue. We are a resource for you here in Georgia. The U.S. DOT basically will deploy whatever resources you want us to deploy to work on the problem. We want to see major demos, and I think the folks in this room ultimately are going to be the reason why the political figures in your state decide it's worth pursuing something that may be controversial, but ultimately provides huge economic benefits. So.
You mentioned that you thought you could raise $20 billion in revenue, and you also talked about public-private partnerships, long-term concessions.
Right.
Did you marry those when you came up with that $20 billion? What was your time frame for financial?
Very good. When you look in the report, the appendix lays out the whole traffic and revenue analysis that we did and all the assumptions that we made. We used a 40-year time period to look at our calculation of net present value of toll revenues and of and normalizing the costs over that time frame. And that's the kind of time, that's sort of a minimum period for a long-term concession. For a tunnel, you'd probably be looking at more like 60 or 75 years, but we didn't take it out that far. So, and our method of doing the net present value analysis may understate what could be raised under a long-term concession rate. What we're finding with long-term concessions is that the traditional models based on 30-year toll revenue bonds, municipal toll revenue bonds, are very conservative in how much can be raised based on a given stream of future toll revenues. Because you have much longer-term investors in the concession type arrangements, they can look for the surplus cash flows that occur much later in the project's life, and value those cash flows. They can also value the depreciation write-offs, which are worth zero to a public agency. So therefore, they seem to be able to generate, on the same toll revenue stream, a significantly larger total amount of money to finance the project. We didn't explicitly take that factor into account. Our starting point in today's dollars was during rush hour in the peak direction, the average would be about 30 cents a mile. So if you're talking about a 10-mile trip, it would be $3 at during the rush hours, the 4 hour more or less. Now, individual facilities, I mean, if you're on 285 North where it's really, really congested, that particular link would probably be higher than that. And it would be lower than that on the less congested links. I mean, it would all be value price based on the demand. But well, it's certainly if you're depending on how much your time is worth. I mean, you'd be buying some saved time, very significant. That's the point. That's why people are willing to pay for these things.
As I said, I think that there's a lot in terms of the scheduling of people. I tell you, the other major group is the school schedules that would have substantial impacts. I mean, I think the operational mindset has just got to change, and people need to start organizing a little bit differently. I think employees are going to increasingly insist on that type of thing. I think one of the major problems employers are having is accessing labor, and I think Bob sent me a study a while ago in France about as congestion grows, your ability to access labor obviously diminishes because people are living further, can't get to work on time. And so I think basically employer support for flexible work hours. If the federal government did not have flex scheduling in Washington, D.C., we would be number one. We're number 3 in the United States right now. It has a huge impact, back to my point about small things have big differences in performance. But I think more than that, I really do think employer, through the business community, engagement on the model that we're utilizing right now to pay for and provide infrastructure is more important than anything. And employers need to, it is amazing to me as we've talked to probably 15 or 20 metropolitan area chambers, the biggest in the United States. They all are effectively advocating for the same thing right now, which is just more money through the exact same model. And I think our pitch has been to them, think about what the model is delivering for you as an employer and start to advocate for policy reforms, not simply the same approach. That's a hard message. I mean, the business community they're not transportation experts. They don't really understand why the system's not responding to their needs. But I think, starting to circle around some specific policy reforms is more important than anything for the business community.
I just ditto that fact. It's interesting. She asked the question about what it would cost for HOV lane if you were to use the express lane. Interesting, in California, they can go as high as $8. But if you ask any parent here that has to get to their daycare, what it costs per minute if you are late, just a survey in my office is $8 per minute. Typically, you're not 1 minute late. So then you make the transportation choice when you're driving. The information that Tyler put out about technology, we have technology. If I can give you on a dynamic message sign that it's going to take you 45 minutes to get to your destination if you take the general purpose road. If you take the express lane, it's going to get you there 15 minutes. I'm not forcing you to do either or. I've given you a transportation choice. It's an alternative. Now you make the decision. If it's going to cost you $8 a minute, you're probably going to pay the $3 or whatever the cost is to get to your child. If you're not late for picking up your child, you're probably going to stay in a general purpose lane because it's not a decision. And that's a lot of what we're seeing with HOT lanes out across the world. California, they said it was a Lexus lane. I think even here we started with a Lexus lane. It's not a Lexus lane. It's a transportation choice. It's giving you the decision to make before you get there, whether you need to pay that toll or whether you need to stay in a general purpose lane. We're not taking anything away. We're just adding to your choices.
Going under is 3 or 4 times more expensive than going up. We do have per lane mile costs. You'll see in the appendix. We've laid it all out. For the tunneling, we use data from the tunnel in Paris, which I think that was something like 80 million a lane mile or something. It's very high. So that's why we tried to minimize only where it really looked like the only feasible solution. I think on the outside the perimeter and even along probably the 285 north, elevated lanes using segmented post-tension concrete type construction like Tampa just used on their elevated express toll lanes that they just opened. They're looking at 14 million per lane mile there for that elevated construction. Very economical given what you're getting for it. And in that particular case, on Tampa's East-West Expressway, that's very, very directional. It's inbound in the morning and outbound in the afternoon. So they're doing reversible lanes there, and they've got 2 lanes, or 3 lanes. So they've added 3 lanes of new capacity inbound and 3 in the afternoon. And they call it's the equivalent of getting 6 lanes of functional use on pillars that are 6 feet wide. So their slogan for the project is 6 lanes in 6 feet. And with no additional right-of-way needed because there's space in the median for those 6-foot wide pillars.
First thing is we give you authority. I mean, there's a misconception that you're not allowed to toll interstate highways. You are part of a pilot program that allows you to do that. There are also other pilot programs, and we basically, as a policy matter, have declared we want flexibility on that front for all states that want the flexibility. Other major area, I think, is the environmental process, and we the major impediment, I think, to private capital participation in the early phases is the uncertainty of U.S. reviews. And we've heard that both from U.S. and international companies. We have processes in place that we think under existing law can expedite. We've got a priority list of projects that we are, I think, effectively going to select major PPP projects. Just to that point, one little tidbit to something Bob said earlier. Every single project over $500 million in the United States right now in the planning phases is going to be a toll road. Every single one. We are, for new capacity, basically we're already moving to a toll model. The next step, the easier step, is going to be to move to a PPP model for those projects. So I think eliminating some of the environmental certainty at the early phases. And then I think the third piece is credit. We have 2 programs. One is a loan program called TIFIA that we have used, and we just approved a loan yesterday actually to a major highway expansion in Dallas, SH 121, in which the state of Texas, and this is a very innovative approach actually, is bundling together a pre-approved TIFIA loan along with an allocation of tax-exempt borrowing authority under the new Internal Revenue Code that we got into law last year, and basically saying to the private entities, bid on the project using these credit enhancements provided by the federal government. There are 3 major entities bidding on that project. TxDOT is estimating they will receive between $800 million and $1 billion in a concession payment in exchange for a 50-year operating lease from the private sector. Major innovation. Texas is going to build, the other major interstate project in the state of Texas, 635, the LBJ freeway, they're going to build using this concession payment. You're going to get 2 huge projects in Texas for the price of 1 and with no taxpayer money. So we offer basic 3 things: our authority to do what you want to do, streamline environmental processes, and then I think credit enhancement for the project.
Thank you for your thought-provoking, insightful comments. Please join me in thanking them. We're dismissed. Please be safe.